Welcome to Class 10. Today we're going to talk about character in the Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. There is no real Hamlet, as there is no real Shakespeare. The character, like the writer, is a reflecting pool, a spacious mirror in which we must see ourselves. Harold Bloom. As we start our second class on character, reflect upon this quotation by Harold Bloom. Do you think that characters are truly mirrors in which we see ourselves? Thinking in terms of Chopin's character Louise Millard, the protagonist from the Story of an Hour, do we see anything of ourselves in this character? Do we empathize with any of the characters we've met so far in this course? In the last lecture, I did a lot of talking to help give us some foundation terminology to analyze character. In today's lesson, we are going to continue to look at character and look at the Story of an Hour. But rather than lots of talking, we're going to practice analyzing a character. So just a recap. In the last lecture, we discussed and defined the various types of character traits, including protagonist and antagonist, hero, flat and round characters, static versus dynamic, major and minor characters, stereotypes, caricatures, and archetypes. Looking at the information from the textbook, they offered a character checklist of a list of things to consider when analyzing. This includes the character's name or lack of name, the character's physical appearance, objects and places associated with the character's actions, the character's thoughts and words, including content, what they think or say, timing, what they think or speak, phrasing, what they think or speak. We can learn a lot about character through what others think about them or comment about them, and finally the narrator's comments about the characters. Keeping these in mind, we will draw upon the information we gather from answering the questions in the character checklist. We come to know the character and attempt to deduce their motives and desires, values and beliefs, strengths and weaknesses, in a very similar way to how we attempt to get to know someone we have met in person. The ability to read people, whether in person or in fiction, requires skills of observation and interpretation, the previous experience we have had with people, characters, and empathy. Reading allows us to build and expand upon not only our empathy but also our experience with people and our skills in observation and interpretation. It is important to remember, though, that contrary to real life, the world of fiction and its characters are contrived and deliberate. One of the advantages of reading is that it allows us to come to know types of people we wouldn't want to or aren't able to know in real life. In analyzing character in fiction, we need to not only take into consideration the character's motives, traits, and values, but also how the text shapes our interpretation of and degree of sympathy or admiration for the character, as well as the function of character in the narrative and what they might represent. While the character may only appear to be a character, they are often representing a particular set of values or a way of looking at the world, as we see in the mother voice in the girl, or a human tendency or demographic group. For example, Louise Millard in The Story of an Hour may be Chopin's way of expressing the confinement that most women felt during this historical period. So in addition to the character checklist, ask yourself what function the character serves in the story. What might the character represent? How the story would be different without that character, and what the author says or shows us through that character. It's also important to remember the time and culture that the narrative was written in and is meant to represent. We may not completely understand the mother's instructions or apparent harshness to the girl, but we need to remember that 1950s in Antigua was very different than the social conditions or expectations of the current society. We might not see marriage as confinement in today's society, but dependence upon a man and lack of women's rights were completely different than those experienced by Chopin in 1894. Additional characters about question include whether or not they are protagonist, which other characters are main or major characters, and which ones are minor. Look closely at the list of character questions on page 225 of the textbook for a list of further questions you should ask about the character. The Story of an Hour was originally published in Vogue magazine in 1894, and it documents the complicated reaction Louise Millard has upon learning of her husband's death. Kate Chopin, born Catherine O'Flaherty, was born February 8, 1950, and died August 22, 1904, in St. Louis, Missouri. Chopin focused on the inner lives of sensitive, daring women. She was a forerunner of feminist writing, and she's still widely recognized as one of America's essential authors. One thing that's important to understand when we're talking about this work, The Story of an Hour, is, and this may be review for some of you, the idea of public versus private space, the ideology of separate spheres, in which women were essentially kept in the home, to be protected from the outside harsh world, but also to create a haven for men to come home for to be saved, essentially, from the business world. Women were meant to act as the moral compass and create a haven for the man. So the woman's primary space was the home, and the man's primary space was the public space of the business world. So this is an important thing to think about when we're looking at this story. The other thing that I would urge you to think about is to take that private versus public space even further and apply it to the house. So the story starts in the living room or the drawing room, but it moves to the bedroom. The bedroom is a completely private space of the house. Even for most of us don't have people just traipsing guests into our bedroom. It's kind of our inner sanctum. So think about the private versus public when we're looking at this story. So that's all I wanted to tell you about The Story of an Hour. I'd encourage you to go to the discussion forum and to answer at least one of the questions, and to post on one of the responses, respond to one of your classmates. Thank you.